The stars beyond the viewport had not moved in 6 hours. That was not unusual. Space travel had a way of making the universe look frozen, a vast, indifferent painting stretched across the black. Commander Lena Vasquez had learned long ago to stop looking at the stars for comfort. They gave none. Instead, she watched her crew. She watched the instruments. She watched the way the air moved inside the ship. And tonight, something about the air was wrong. The ISV Persistence was a mid-class research vessel, not built for war. It carried 12 crew members, a modest weapons array, and enough sensor equipment to map 3 solar systems simultaneously. It had been assigned to survey the Drenth Corridor, a quiet stretch of space between human-controlled territory and the outer reaches of what cartographers diplomatically labeled contested zones. Nobody shot at you in the Drenth Corridor. There was nothing there worth shooting over. Or so the mission briefing had said. Lena was halfway through her 3rd cup of cold coffee when the feeling hit her. It was not a sound. It was not a reading on any of her screens. It was the particular and deeply human sensation of being watched. She had felt it twice before in her career, once in a debris field where a derelict ship had turned out to be occupied, and once during a ground survey on Callan 4, where something large and hungry had been tracking her team through fog for an hour before anyone noticed. Both times the feeling had arrived before the evidence. Both times the feeling had been correct. She set down her coffee. "Dax," she said quietly, without looking up. Engineer Dax Foray was 3 stations to her left, running routine diagnostics on the drive manifold. He was a broad-shouldered man with the unhurried movements of someone who had worked in space long enough to understand that panic wasted oxygen. He looked up at her tone. "Commander, run a manual sweep of Cargo Bay 3. Not automated, manual." Dax opened his mouth to ask why, then closed it. He had served with Lena for 4 years. He had learned that her instincts were not decoration. Understood. She turned to the science station. Havel Oren was a lean, precise man in his early 40s, perpetually surrounded by data tablets and half-eaten ration bars. He specialized in xenobiology and had the particular genius of someone who had spent decades thinking about life in forms humans had not yet named. He was currently reading something that had made him frown. "Havel, environmental sensors in the cargo base, what do they say?" He pulled up the display without question. "Clear, temperature nominal, no motion detected, air pressure." He paused, his frown deepened. Say that like a word." "The pressure differential in Cargo Bay 3 is 0.003% lower than it should be for a sealed compartment. It is technically within acceptable variance. I would normally dismiss it." He looked at her. "I am not dismissing it." "Good." Lena was already rising from her chair. "Yuna?" Combat Specialist Yuna Cho was at her station near the door, reviewing security rotations with the focused efficiency that made her either excellent to serve with or exhausting to argue with, depending on who you asked. She stood when Lena stood. "Ma'am?" "Full kit, sidearm and scanner. Cargo Bay 3. "Contact?" "Unknown, possibly nothing." "Possibly nothing," Yuna repeated, already moving toward the equipment locker. "My favorite kind." Cargo Bay 3 was the largest of the ship's 4 storage compartments. A wide, dimly lit space stocked with equipment crates, survey drones and their charging racks, and the kind of organized clutter that accumulated on any working research vessel. The lighting strips along the ceiling gave everything a cool, bluish tint. The air smelled faintly of machine oil and recycled atmosphere. The 4 of them entered carefully. Dax moved right, Yuna moved left. Havel stayed near the door with his scanner. Lena walked straight down the center aisle. Nothing moved. Nothing sounded. Every instrument Havel held confirmed the same unremarkable truth. The room was empty. Lena stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the cargo bay and did something that would have seemed irrational to anyone watching. She closed her eyes. Not for long, 3 seconds, maybe 4. long enough for her visual cortex to stop dominating and for the other inputs to rise. The faint hum of the ventilation system, the barely perceptible vibration of the drive core beneath her boots, the smell of the air, which carried, very faintly, something she could not identify, something that did not belong to metal or plastic or recycled atmosphere. She opened her eyes and looked at the space between two large equipment crates of a left wall. The light there was wrong. It was subtle, the kind of subtle that a camera would record faithfully and a computer would process as normal, because a computer looked for deviations in data values, not deviations in the quality of a moment. But Lena had grown up hunting with her grandmother in the dry hills of southern Chile. She had spent summers learning to find animals that did not want to be found, creatures that froze, that matched their background, that made themselves into pieces of the landscape. Her grandmother had told her that the trick was never to look for something. You looked at everything, and you waited for the world to feel uneven. The world felt uneven between those two crates. "Yuna," she said, keeping her voice absolutely steady, "cover the space between the blue crate and the gray crate on the port wall. Do not fire unless I say." Havel turned and raised his weapon toward what appeared by every measurable standard to be empty air. "Havel," Lena continued, "is there a way your scanner could detect a mass displacement effect, something physically occupying space without registering on thermal or motion sensors?" Havel was already adjusting. His fingers moved quickly across his device. "Air displacement mapping. That is not a standard scan, but—" A soft tone from his device. His face went still. "Commander, there is something there. Two somethings. I am reading void spaces in the particulate distribution, shapes, humanoid, roughly, one larger, one smaller." The air between the two crates shimmered. It was the only word Lena could find for it later when she wrote the report. The light did not break. There was no dramatic flash or sudden movement. The shimmer was more like the visual distortion above hot pavement on a summer road, a ripple in the integrity of the space itself. And then, where empty air had been, there were two figures. They were tall, taller than any human in the room, though their frames were thin to the point of seeming architectural rather than biological. Their skin was a deep, lightless block that seemed to absorb the cargo bay's blue lighting rather than reflect it. Their eyes were large and completely silver, like mirrors set into sharp-boned faces. Their hands had too many joints. They wore no clothing that Lena could identify, but across their bodies ran faint patterns that shifted and moved, living circuitry or something that performed the same function. The larger one stared at Lena. Lena stared back. For a long moment, no one in the cargo bay made a sound. Then the larger figure spoke. Its voice came not from a mouth, which remained closed, but from somewhere in its chest, translated through technology into something that approximated human speech. "You should not be able to see us." "And yet," Lena said. The alien identified itself as Arail, a shadow weaver of the Third Order in a civilization called the Myrath. The smaller figure was an apprentice named Sovereign, young enough by Myrath standards that it spent most of the following conversation looking at the human crew with undisguised bewilderment. They were escorted, at weapons point, though Lena kept that point discreet, to the ship's conference room. Havel ran a full biological scan and confirmed that neither figure was armed in any way he could detect. That did not, he noted privately, mean they were not armed. It simply meant he could not detect it. Arail sought across the table from Lena with the particular stillness of something that had never needed to perform comfort for another species before. "How long have you known we were aboard?" "I noticed something was wrong an hour ago. My instruments confirmed two objects occupying space approximately 6 minutes ago." She looked at the alien steadily. "How long have you been on my ship?" A pause. 11 hours. The number landed in the room like a dropped tool. Dax looked at the ceiling. Yuna's expression did not change, but her jaw tightened. Havel made a note on his tablet with the focused energy of a man redirecting his alarm into productivity. "And before this ship?" Lena asked. Ariel's silver eyes moved slowly around the conference room, taking in the human faces, seeming to weigh something. The Mirith have observed human vessels for many years. We have walked aboard research stations, military installations, transport ships. We have been on Earth. Havel stopped writing. Earth, Lena said. Yes, on 4 separate occasions over the last 2 decades, in populated areas. Ariel's translated voice carried nothing that resembled guilt. It stated facts the way a geologist described rock strata, with the calm authority of long record. No human detected us until tonight. Then why are you still here? Lena asked. If you were invisible, if you've been invisible for years, why not simply leave when you heard us coming? For the first time, something shifted in Ariel's expression. It was small, a tightening around the silver eyes, a microscopic tension at the jaw, but it was there. Because I had already been seen. I processed the data incorrectly. I assumed your sensor equipment had malfunctioned and would reset. I chose to remain still rather than move. The large eyes fixed on Lena. You were not using sensor equipment. You used your eyes. Yes. We did not prepare for that. Lena leaned back in her chair. Across the table, an alien species that had walked unseen through human civilization for 20 years sat in the bluish light of a research vessel in the middle of nowhere, confronting the fact that its greatest advantage had just been undone by one human woman who had grown up learning to find things that did not want to be found. Then I think, Lena said carefully, that we have something to discuss. Ariel turned to Sovereign. The apprentice's silver eyes were wide. Its body patterns had slowed to a near stillness that, Havel would later theorize, corresponded to shock in Myrith physiology. Shadowmaster, Sovereign said, and the translation came through small and uncertain. If humans can see us, what do we do? Ariel did not answer immediately. It looked at Lena. It looked at Yuna, who had not lowered her weapon. It looked at Havel, who was already running comparative analysis on his tablet with the appetite of someone who had just been handed the most interesting puzzle of his career. That, Ariel said finally, is an excellent question. Outside the viewport, the stars held still, and somewhere in the dark between them, patient and invisible, and no longer quite as certain of themselves as they had been an hour ago, a fleet waited for a report that was going to change everything. The silence that followed Ariel's words was the kind that had weight. Lena let it sit. She had learned early in her command career that silence was a tool, that the person who moved to fill it first was usually the person who needed something. She watched Ariel across the conference table and waited, and the alien, to its credit, seemed to understand exactly what she was doing. You are patient, Ariel said finally. We evolved that way, Lena replied. Patience is how we hunted. Havel looked up from his tablet. He had been running comparison analyses since the moment they had sat down, cross-referencing Myrith biology against everything xenobiological records had accumulated over the last century of first contacts. Most of it was useless. The Myrith apparently had been careful to remain out of those records entirely. But Havel was the kind of scientist who could build a picture from the absence of data as easily as from its presence. He set his tablet down with the quiet confidence of a man who had arrived somewhere important. May I speak? He asked Lena. She gestured for him to continue. He turns to Ariel. Your cloaking technology works by bending light around your physical form. The photons that would ordinarily reflect off your body and travel to an observer's eye are redirected around you instead. The observer receives no visual data from your location and therefore perceives empty space. He paused. That is the mechanism, yes? Ariel regarded him with those flat silver eyes. Broadly accurate. And it works perfectly against every sensor technology you have encountered.
Thermal, motion, electromagnetic, all of them operate on the principle of detecting a signal. Your technology eliminates the signal. No signal, no detection. Havel nodded slowly, as though confirming something with himself. The flaw, and I want to be clear that I do not call it a flaw to diminish your achievement, which is genuinely extraordinary, is that you cannot eliminate the disruption. Bending light around a solid object does not make the light behave naturally. It creates micro-distortions at the boundary where diverted photons re-enter their original path. The background behind you does not look entirely normal. It looks almost normal. Almost is enough for a machine. Almost is not enough for a human brain. Sovereign, the apprentice, leaned slightly forward. Why not, if the distortion is small enough that your instruments cannot detect it?
Because our instruments are not our primary detection system, Havel said. They never were. For most of human evolutionary history, we had no instruments at all. What we had was a brain that needed to keep us alive in environments full of things that wanted to eat us. He stood from his chair and moved to the wall display, pulling up a basic diagram of human visual processing pathways. The human visual cortex does not simply record what the eyes see. It actively predicts what the environment should look like based on pattern recognition and prior experience, and it flags any deviation from that prediction as a priority alert. This process happens in milliseconds, below conscious thought. You do not decide to notice something wrong, you simply notice. The decision comes after. Ariel was very still. You are describing an involuntary threat detection mechanism. Precisely, and it is extremely sensitive to the specific type of distortion your cloaking creates, because that distortion resembles, almost exactly, the visual signature of a large predator hiding in natural cover. Havel brought up a second image, heat camera footage of a large cat concealed in tall grass. The outline was nearly invisible. Nearly. A tiger in tall grass bends the visual field around it in a way that is structurally similar to what your light bending creates. Our ancestors who could detect that distortion survived. Those who could not, did not. After millions of years of that selection pressure, human brains became, among other things, extraordinarily good at detecting the specific type of visual anomaly that your technology produces.
Sovereign turned to Ariel. Shadow Master. We designed our cloaking to defeat sensors. We modeled detection against 47 species. We never modeled against evolved biological threat response. No, Ariel said quietly. We did not. Yuna had been leaning against the wall near the door with her arms folded, listening. She spoke for the first time since they had sat down. How many ships do you have in this sector? Ariel turned to her. I'm going to assume, Yuna continued, that you didn't send 2 scouts onto a research vessel in the middle of nowhere without having some kind of support positioned nearby. So, how many? A long pause. 7 vessels, Ariel said. Dax whistled softly. Cloaked? Lena asked. Yes. Lena turned to Havel. He was already pulling up the sensor display on the wall screen, rerouting the Persistence's passive observation data through a new filtering algorithm he had been quietly building for the last 20 minutes. The screen populated with the immediate space around them, and 7 distinct, subtle distortions materialized in the scan field, arranged in a loose perimeter around them. Ariel stared at the screen. That is, the translation hesitated, that is not possible. Those ships are not emitting any signal. They don't need to emit a signal, they just need to exist in space. Space has a background. When something occupies space and bends the light passing through it, the background changes. Havel's algorithm maps background distortions rather than looking for active signals. She paused. We've had passive observation running since we entered the Drenth corridor. We've been logging distortions for 6 days. The silver eyes moved from the screen to Lena's face. We have data on your fleet's movements for nearly a week, she continued. Entry vectors, positioning patterns, the way your ships orient when they change formation.
She folded her hands on the table. We did not act on that data. We waited to see what you were doing. Sovereign's body patterns flickered rapidly, the Mirith equivalent, Havel would note in his records, of visible agitation. You knew, for days, you knew we were here and you said nothing. We're researchers, Doc said from the corner. We observe first. Arail was silent for a long time. The conference room held the particular stillness of a situation balancing on a point, waiting to fall in one direction or another. Lena watched the alien's face and thought about all the places Arail had claimed to have walked unseen. Military installations, civilian population centers, Earth itself 4 times among ordinary people going about ordinary lives with no idea that something was moving through their world, recording them. She thought about what it meant that those days were over. I need to contact the Conclave, Arail said finally. I know you do. I'll give you access to a communication channel, encrypted, private. Take whatever time you need. She stood. But understand before you make that call that we have already transmitted a compressed data package to Alliance Command containing everything we've logged in this sector. That transmission went out 40 minutes ago. It cannot be recalled. She met the silver eyes steadily. Whatever the Conclave decides, the information is already in human hands. Destroying this ship would accomplish nothing except removing the people most interested in talking to you. The balance tipped. The Myrith High Conclave, Arail explained later, was not a government in any structure humans would recognize. It was closer to a living consensus, a network of elder shadow weavers who communicated in compressed signal bursts and reached agreement through a process that looked, from the outside, like silence, and felt from the inside like deep water finding its own level. Decisions emerged rather than being made. The decision that emerged from the Conclave's 3-hour deliberation was not the one Sovereign had feared. Sovereign had feared destruction. Standing in the corridor outside the communications room while Arail conducted the call, the apprentice had told Una this with a directness that surprised her. When something discovers what we are, the Conclave's first consideration is always elimination of the discovery. It is not cruelty, it is mathematics. A secret revealed to one is a secret revealed to the potential of all. Una had listened to this without changing expression. Then I'll tell you what changed the mathematics, she said. You can't eliminate the discovery. You could destroy this ship. You could probably destroy quite a lot of human ships. But humans have already seen you, not just Commander Vasquez. Every human who has ever noticed something wrong in an empty room, felt watched from a space where nothing showed on their instruments, spotted a shimmer in the air and dismissed it as imagination. All of them saw fragments of what we saw tonight. The only difference is that they didn't have a scientist standing next to them with a scanner to confirm it. She looked at the apprentice. You're saying the secret is already gone. I'm saying the secret was never as secure as you believed. We just formalized it tonight. When Arail emerged from the communications room, its posture had shifted. Something in the angle of the long shoulders, something in the quality of the stillness. Not defeat, something more complicated than defeat. The Conclave has authorized a dialogue, it said. Lena, who had been waiting in the corridor with her coffee, hot this time, nodded once. Then let's talk. They talked for 11 hours. Havel recorded everything with the barely contained intensity of a man who had spent his career studying life in the universe and was now sitting across from the most significant example of it he had ever encountered. Docs ran quiet maintenance checks on the ship's systems and kept everyone supplied with food and water with the practical grace of someone who understood that history still required sandwiches. Una remained present and watchful in the way that had stopped feeling threatening to Ariel somewhere around the 4th hour and started feeling, the alien admitted, like a form of honesty. Lena led the conversation. What emerged across those 11 hours was a picture that was equal parts remarkable and deeply uncomfortable. The Mirith had been operating in human space for 23 years. In that time, they had gathered intelligence on fleet movements, technological development, political structure, and cultural patterns.
They had done this not out of hostility, Ariel was careful to explain, but out of the same logic that governed all Mirith interaction with other species. Know everything about them before they know you exist. The advantage of complete information over a species that does not know it is being studied was, in the Mirith framework, the only truly safe position. You've done this with every species you've encountered, Lena said. Yes. How many? Many. The Conclave does not release the full number even to Shadow Weavers of my order. Ariel's translated voice carried something that might, in a human, have been described as resignation. What I can tell you is that among those many species, in all the years of observation, no detection occurred that was not a result of equipment malfunction or deliberate exposure. Until tonight. Until humans, Havel said. Until humans.
Lena set down her cup. She had been building toward the central question for hours, letting the conversation find its own shape, waiting for the moment when it would bear the weight of what she wanted to put on it. She thought the moment had arrived. Here is what I want you to bring back to the Conclave, she said. Not a threat, a proposition. Azrael waited. You are the finest intelligence-gathering civilization in this region of the galaxy. You walk unseen through the affairs of species that don't know you exist. You collect information with a precision and a breadth that nothing else we've encountered comes close to matching. She paused. And you have just discovered that your invisibility, which is the foundation of everything you do, does not work on us. Which means that at some point, not today, maybe not for years, but eventually, humans are going to be a problem for you. Anywhere you go where humans are present, you are visible. Your agents can be seen. Your ships can be detected. Your entire operational model becomes compromised the moment a human is in the room. Azrael said nothing. The silver eyes were steady and unreadable, but Sovereign's body patterns had gone very slow and deliberate. Attention, Havel had decided, looked the same in most species. So, here is the other side of that, Lena continued. You need us to not be a problem, and we, she gestured, a small open motion that took in Havel, Dax, Una, the ship around them, the data transmission already traveling toward Alliance Command. We need to know what you know, 23 years of intelligence on this region, the species you've observed, their capabilities, their intentions toward humanity, the things they have been planning and building and preparing while we had no idea anyone was watching them. She looked at Ariel with the directness that she had been told, over the years, made some people uncomfortable. She had never tried to soften it. We are not asking you to stop what you do. We are asking you to do it with us instead of around us. The alien was quiet for a long time. You are describing a partnership, Ariel said, between the species that cannot be seen and the species that can see through anything. I'm describing the most effective intelligence operation in this galaxy's history, Lena said. You provide the invisibility, we provide the perception. You infiltrate, we analyze. Between the two of us, there is nothing in this region of space we couldn't find, track, and understand. Sovereign looked at Ariel with something that was unmistakably hope. Ariel straightened. The movement was slow and deliberate, and it seemed to carry the weight of a conclusion. The conclave will require time. This is not a decision that emerges quickly. Take the time you need, Lena said. We're not going anywhere. There is one thing I must understand before I return to them. Ariel fixed its silver eyes on her. You had 6 days of data on our fleet. You had us at weapons point in your cargo bay. You had every advantage. Why did you not simply capture us, extract the intelligence you needed, and eliminate the threat? Lena picked up her coffee cup. It was empty. She set it back down. Because that's not how hunters think, she said. You don't kill the thing you're tracking the moment you find it. You watch it. You learn it. You understand where it goes and what it does and what it knows. She met the mirrored eyes across the table. And then, if you're patient enough and careful enough,
You don't have to kill it at all. Ariel looked at her for a long time. We will return with the Conclave's answer, it said finally, within 3 days. We'll be here. They left the way they had arrived, in silence, in shimmer, in the particular absence that the Persistence's crew now knew to look for and would never be able to stop seeing. Lena watched the 2 distortions move through the cargo bay, pass through the hull membrane of the docking seal, and disappear into the block. Dax came to stand beside her at the viewport. For a moment, neither of them said anything. You think they'll come back? He asked. Yes, she said. How sure? She thought about it, about the way Ariel had looked at the screen showing 7 of its ships mapped in perfect detail by an algorithm a human scientist had built in 40 minutes, about Sovereign's body patterns going slow with something that translated across all the distance of biology and evolution and the cold width of space to the unmistakable shape of a young person realizing that the world was larger and stranger and more interesting than they had been taught. Sure enough, she said. Outside, the stars held still, and somewhere in the dark between them, invisible to every sensor the Persistence parried, but not anymore, to the human eyes that tracked the quality of light with the patience of a species that had spent 1,000,000 years learning to see what the world was hiding. Somewhere out there, a fleet was moving. And for the first time in 23 years, it knew it was being watched.